From the right, I'm Matt Lewis.
From the left, I'm Bill Scher.
And you're watching
The Week in Blog.
Welcome back, Bill.
It's been practically a month since we've had a chat. I hope you had a lovely holiday.
I did. It was fabulous. Things are good. How about you? How was the first holiday with the baby, right?
Yeah, we went all out. We did Hanukkah and Christmas with the baby.
That's 9 crazy nights.
Exactly. So good time had by all. New Year's Eve with They Might Be Giants here in downtown Northampton, Massachusetts was very exciting.
Did they do Istanbul, Constantinople?
That was the encore, in fact.
It's nobody's business but the Turks.
So they did 2 shows. So they had a family show, which we went to it at 3 with all their children's music, and then the adult show, which I was not able to attend because Lassie needs to be put to bed before then. But
did they do the "You're Not the Boss of Me" song from Malcolm in the Middle?
No, they did not do that.
I don't know if they performed that or not.
They did not do it, but they did a lot of their greatest kitty hits. They did Particle Man. They did Istanbul.
The Flood album
had by all, but
the Flood album was the quintessential They Might Be Giants album.
Yes, that was Flood, I believe.
Hits, yes. So, well, great. Okay, but while you were resting and attending They Might Be Giants concerts, other Democrats around the nation were quivering in their boots, apparently, and we had 2 U.S. Senate retirements that came down the pike this week. One of them was really surprising. Byron Dorgan, senator from North Dakota, retired. I think that caught everybody by surprise. Senator Dodd from Connecticut retired. That was less of a surprise. I guess before I get into into what bloggers had to say, what's your immediate take on this?
Well, I was surprised by both. Actually, I actually thought Dodd wasn't seriously in threat, even though the polling numbers didn't look so great. I figured he had been around so long and had such a deep relationship with the state, and I didn't think the Republican opponents were terribly intimidating, that he would choose to ride it out. But that, even though the whole notion of Democratic retirements, leads to some bad political headlines for Democrats, I think in the Dodd case, most folks expressing relief because the guy on the bench, Richard Blumenthal, also longtime figure in the state attorney general, elected several times, very high approval ratings. He was always expected to run for federal office eventually when the opening arose, so he was perfectly prepared to step in. So no one, I think, on the Democratic side is terribly concerned what that means for that race. I don't know if you can necessarily take that retirement and extrapolate out and say, the whole party is in trouble in 2010. Although most people expect Democrats to lose some seats.
Right. Well, let me stop you there because a couple bloggers were agreeing with you here. Rich Lowry at National Review says it'll be satisfying to see Dodd go, but it helps the Dems' chances of holding the seat. John Miller, also at NRO, Dodd's retirement not only helps Democrats in Connecticut, but also around the country. He would have served well as a poster boy for the culture of corruption critique that minority parties always like to advance. Republicans will still make the claim, and it will still have a bite, but it's losing one of its most compelling illustrations. Jim Garrity at NRO denied that Dodd's retirement was good for Dems, though. But I think that you and the others are right. Dodd was pretty vulnerable. Linda McMahon, the wife of infamous WWE founder and president Vince McMahon, is running. I don't think she can win personally.
She has money.
She has plenty of money, but she just seems like the perfect villain to cast. And then Rob Simmons, I think, would have had a better chance. Former congressman, I think a CIA guy, and not a right winger by any stretch. He would have probably posed the greatest challenge. But either one of them were beating Dodd. So I think that Dodd's retirement's good for Dems, but Dorgan's entirely different. I lived in North Dakota for a while, and
Is that right?
I would say there's no way that Republicans don't win this seat. This is, I would say, 99% chance a Republican pickup opportunity. And, the blogs agree. Mo Lane at Red State. I giggled at this. Actually, I laughed like a loon. And then the toddler started laughing. And then my wife threatened me with death if I woke the baby. So I stopped laughing. But I kept grinning because Dorgan wasn't on any of my 2010 pickup lists. Hot Air's Alapundit. It says, "'Twas Obamacare that killed the beast. Healthcare reform is radioactive in North Dakota, and thanks to his support of it, so was Dorgan. As of 2 weeks ago, a 3-term incumbent, he trailed the state's Republican Governor John Hoeven in a hypothetical matchup by fully 22 points. So here's his 'you can't fire me, I quit' moment." I tend to agree, but really I think that it was more John Hoeven, the threat that Hoeven was going to get in. But even if Hoeven doesn't run, the thing is, in North Dakota, the Republican bench is incredibly strong. Republicans dominate the state house, the state senate, and they've got all of these positions, not just the governor and lieutenant governor. Hang on one second. Not just the governor and lieutenant governor, but they've also got, there's an insurance commissioner, there's an ag commissioner, there's a public safety, some sort of commissioner. There's all these commissioners in North Dakota, and they're all Republican.
Now, is there any? I know people have speculated about Ed Schultz running, which I don't necessarily think is going to happen. But is there anyone in that mold? And I know next to nothing about North Dakota politics, so I'm deferring to you. Is there any kind of Democratic populist type, like Dorgan, like Ed Schultz, who could step up and give the governor a run for his money?
The simple answer is no. There are three or four candidates who've been mentioned. None of them, I think, can win. One of them, of course, is Earl Pomeroy, the state.
At least he's bowed out, I believe.
He said he's going to stay in the House, and that's going to be. He might have himself. He still may be ousted. So Pomeroy says he's not going to run, but he's already elected statewide because there's only one congressman in the whole state. Then there is a Heidi Heitkamp, who's the former Attorney General. She actually nearly beat John Hoeven the first time he ran for governor. Word is that she is seriously considering running. There's also a guy, I believe his name is Roger Johnson. He's with the Farm Union. Apparently he just resigned his job at the Farm Union today, which led to a lot of speculation. And Roger Johnson was previously the Ag Commissioner. But he was defeated last time when he ran for re-election, I think in 06 or 08. So there's really not, compared to the Republican talent. I think that clearly this is a Republican pickup. It's really hard to imagine. And again, Ed Schultz, by the way, could legally, despite what he said, he really could run. There's no law that's forbidding him from returning to North Dakota and running for Senate. I don't think he would win. I don't think it would be a smart career move. If I was him, I would stay. How many people have their own TV show? That's pretty cool. So I don't see him really wanting to do that anyway. But
no, I'm not expecting that either.
So I think it's a clear Republican pickup, but I think Dems hold in Connecticut.
Now, despite the fact that, and I agree with you, that's a likely Republican pickup in North Dakota, it would seem to ensure that Democrats would not be able to maintain a 60-vote majority in the Senate. Let me submit this to you as why it may be good for Democrats on a policy basis. Joe Rahm at Climate Progress speculated that without having the need to run for re-election, Dorgan might be freed up to vote for a climate bill if one actually does get to the Senate floor. And there is some question about that, but it is still, according to Harry Reid, on the agenda for the spring. You still have Senators Kerry, Lieberman, and Graham still in tripartisan talks. Graham this week dug in his heels that he's still committed to it, despite getting censured symbolically by various South Carolina local Republican parties. And Dorgan has made some critical remarks about the structure of the House bill, but hasn't dismissed the idea of doing a climate bill entirely. North Dakota is sort of torn between as far as special interests are concerned, having a lot of coal there, concerned about what the impact of a carbon cap bill would mean, and the potential for a lot of wind in North Dakota to be a real cutting-edge industry for the state. So Joe Rahm at Climate Progress argued that Dorgan might feel freed up to vote his conscience and actually support the bill after maybe extracting some concessions or being assuaged about aspects of the House bill. He's concerned about the carbon markets that would be created. Rahm has argued that Waxman's version of it actually addresses Dorgan's concerns. So if you're President Obama, and I think this is Obama's mentality, you always presumed you were going to lose seats in the midterms because that's what typically happens. Your opposition is energized. Your own base is a little conflicted after seeing you have to deal with governing trade-offs. You're going to lose your supermajority. So you want to get your big stuff through now anyway. If this is going to help you get another big item on your checklist passed, who cares if this means you're going to have, say, 55 seats instead of 56 seats come 2011. You weren't expecting to hold on to 60 anyway. So this might, and I don't want to assume that Joe Rahm is accurate. I think a lot of senators sort of flinch at the notion that their votes could be altered by outside political ramifications. But it could mean more likely that cap and trade passes, and that's what might be more important to Obama's long-term agenda anyway.
I think that you're correct in the sense that, if anything, I think this makes Dorgan more liberal for the next year, for the remaining time he's in office. But having said that, keep in mind, senators aren't pawns that Obama can control. In fact, if anything,
I think if he didn't know that already, he learned that lesson this year.
Exactly. And so while Obama may be perfectly happy to sacrifice 5 Democrat senators to pass his sweeping legacy legislation, they may have second thoughts about that. And when I say they, I include Harry Reid, who's going to be in a very tough re-election battle against either Sue Loudon or Danny Tarkanian in Nevada. Arlen Specter, who is up against Pat Toomey. So there are, in Pennsylvania where that issue will resonate. So, having said that, I agree with you in the sense that I think Dorgan would probably become more liberal. He had to always sort of stay in check to fit into the red state of North Dakota. But I also, if I were betting, I don't think that any sort of cap and trade is going to come up the rest of the year, because I think it puts Democrats in such a vulnerable position. Obama may be willing to trade them for the legislation, but they may have other thoughts about that.
Well, excuse me if I get too far off of the retirement topic, and we should probably move to healthcare in a sec. But what Reid has said is, after healthcare is finished, which they expect to finish this month, they'd move on to a jobs bill, they'd move on to financial reform, and a carbon cap would follow that.
Right.
And there are some folks talking optimistically they can get that all done, by say late spring. There's some folks saying that's crazy talk. You're overloading the Senate. You're putting too many seats at risk if you pile too much on. That's controversial. I suspect that it's going to hinge upon, at least in part, what is the political fall once healthcare passed. There's all this agita about it. It could mean after it passes, everyone's poll numbers go up, and as Obama said, we got to get these senators and congresspeople, limber again. That you can do more than one thing and not feel like you're exhausted. We got to group these people back into shape. If they get a good bump after that, maybe they'll feel more comfortable doing the next thing. And if there's a lot of blowback afterwards, then they're going to get increasingly skittish. So I think it remains to be seen what the political climate's going to be once healthcare is done.
I think that when you look at the fact that we had 2 sitting U.S. senators, both powerful incumbents, with a lot of power, a lot of money at their disposal, who decided the political environment was so toxic that they weren't going to seek re-election, I think that probably implies that Democrats are going to be skittish.
Well,
they have polling numbers.
In Dodd's case, it's almost solely around issues about the banking system. It's not about. I mean, healthcare is not the reason why Dodd's stepping down. Dorgan, I don't think we really know. You can certainly speculate.
But also, Bill, this is also on the heels.
The governor's challenge. We don't know that for an absolute fact. I mean, the guy's been in public office for 40 years. He may simply felt like it was time for him to retire and enjoy his later years. We don't know.
I think we do, but look, this is also on the heels of 4 Democrats retiring from the House and 1 switching to become a Republican, and now we have these 2 senators.
Pretty small numbers when you think about it.
2 U.S. senators, though, in essentially a 24-hour period. I mean, again, maybe it stops, but I'm wondering if this is the beginning of a trend.
Well, I think the fact that these were clustered together gets pundits wagging. And Mark Ambinder on his blog said there are a lot of Democrats who want to retire, and this gives them political cover. And I tweeted this afterwards. What Democrat would want to retire now? It's one thing if you go out there and get beat, but if you're a Democrat, this is your time to shine. This is your chance to actually influence policy and pass stuff. Why would want to go run away now? I think is insane. And I'm curious if what Amber is saying is true there, but it may be that there is going to be a mass exodus.
Right.
And if that's the case, then obviously that's not going to. Because the question is, it's extremely likely you would gain seats in and off your election, but it's a question of the degree of losses. And obviously, there's a mass exodus, you'd have a lot of losses, or more likely. Although I would note that one other blogger, Blue Gal, had a counterintuitive argument. Quote: "We need more retirements in the Congress, not less." Essentially, we need fresh blood in here, and a lot of these folks have really. Quote, "Democrats in particular should be ashamed for needing to wheel Robert Byrd into the chamber late Christmas Eve. There should be other progressive candidates available to run in their place. You shouldn't have to rely on, these people, pushing their health to the brink."
I agree. I think we'd be better off with some, on both sides of the aisle, with some new blood.
Yeah.
I ran into Shelley Moore Capito. I didn't talk to her, but it's so weird. I was at a little deli called Bubby's in Tribeca in New York City. Great place, and she happened to be in there. I have no idea why. Not a big fan of her, so I did not approach her. All right, well, let's go ahead and move on to your topic here.
Well, yes, we're in the healthcare endgame after the Senate passed its legislation on Christmas Eve, and while up until this point, the main issue on the left has been to try to maintain the public option, and that seems essentially lost at this point. And all the signals from the House have been that they're going to try to trade that to get, say, better subsidies and make premiums more affordable. You're starting to see this week a shift in the main rallying cry on the left, and that is this issue of taxing high premium insurance plans, something that the Senate bill does and the House bill does not. Most of the financing of both bills comes out of savings, healthcare savings, but you can't cover 30 million plus people on the savings alone. There has to be some additional revenue coming in. The House bill largely does it through a surtax on millionaires. The Senate bill does it in part through taxing high premium insurance plans on the notion that is a overall cost saver in the healthcare system and is inherently progressive. But there's a counter argument to that that a lot of union plans have high premiums. There are high premiums in certain areas of the country because healthcare is more expensive there. So you're going to actually harm people who are in the middle class. Obama's going to violate his pledge not to raise taxes on the middle class, and therefore that tax should be rejected. Not only is Pelosi seemingly digging in her heels about the subject, You're seeing bloggers on our site, ourfuture.org. We actually brought in one of the top Huffington Post healthcare bloggers, Richard Eskow, to blog on this solely for several weeks. So he had an interesting exchange with Ezra Klein, who's a progressive who is for the tax. They had a back and forth last month. But this week you saw Susie Madrak at Crooks and Liars. You're seeing the folks at Fire Dog Lake really rev up on this. John Walker's been on this for a while. You saw Lee Stranahan, if I'm pronouncing his last name right, on Fire Dog Lake, digging up a video of Obama attacking McCain for characterizing, quote-unquote, Cadillac plans as being the purview of just the wealthy and making the argument that these hit a lot of working-class folks, too.
Right.
And Stranahan was literally saying, I am ending my support for Barack Obama because he's flip-flopping on that issue. So there's definitely some increased intensity around the subject. And this is in wake of the news on Thursday being that Obama is saying, I definitely want this as a cost saver in the plan and leaning on the House to give up its resistance. So this might be an additional point of friction between Obama and his base, or at least a part of his base, going into this healthcare endgame.
Yeah, wow, very interesting. I'm sure I disagree with the people who are critical of Obama on a lot of things, but I think they're right. I think that it is a broken promise. And I think that, a lot of times there's an assumption that if somebody has something that they're rich. And in this case, it's because, the unions had negotiated to get them maybe even turn down salary, right, or money.
Well, that's the argument. That
to have
you're not giving me wage increases, at least give me this.
Right, exactly. So, I feel their pain, and it's interesting. Do you think that so this one blogger said that he's no longer going to support Obama over this. But, is this kind of an isolated incident or someone kind of brushing him back? Or is this sort of does this have legs? Is this...
Well, it's probably a lot to think that there'd be a mass renouncement of total support for Barack Obama over this one issue. I think Lee is probably a bit of an outlier in that respect. But it does seem at least to be within the blogosphere some of the top progressive healthcare bloggers, Ezra Klein at the Washington Post and Jonathan Cohn at the New Republic, have been supportive of this tax. And they've been kind of the go-to bloggers for understanding of the complexities of the healthcare issue. But you're starting to see in the more activist corners of the net roots a consensus that this is a bad deal. Not only is it bad on policy grounds, not only is it going to hurt middle-class folks, but it's politically dangerous. And this is one of Richard Eskow's most recent posts. The poll after poll after poll shows opposition to taxing these insurance plans and support for the House plan of taxing the income of millionaires. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of people saying, look, why are you trying to commit political suicide here when you have an option that doesn't require you to do something that's politically unpopular? The argument from some healthcare wonks is, well, this is good policy that's going to reduce healthcare spending overall, but you're starting to see those wonks who disagree with that notion to speak up more and get more of a platform because so many other blogs are starting to talk about it.
And it also, sort of comes on the heels of Obama's broken promise over the allowing C-SPAN to cover, the conference committee and C-SPAN's.
That's got a lot of blog attention, I think, on the right and the left.
Yeah.
And it's one of those promises that Obama made. And I think Ezra Klein might have made this point. I fear me if I'm mistaken. But it's a promise he really didn't need to make.
Mm-hmm.
I doubt he won a vote by saying that. And it was one of those promises where there's no way you could keep that. There's
and
no
nor
way
do
you're
you really have, and nor do you have control
of negotiation in front of C-SPAN cameras. It was never going to happen that way.
And nor do you have control over it. It's not really the president's decision,
right?
Whether or not
he could decide now these endgame discussions are going to be in front of cameras, but You wouldn't get good negotiations that way. You get a lot of, whenever they have a conference committee on C-SPAN, it's totally staged, and everyone sort of says talking points, and no one actually negotiates anything.
Yeah, that's my concern is, okay, if the Democrats relent and open this up to cameras, the real deals are going to be cut in back rooms anyway. It'll become a show. And then
you'd have to pass a law. Some local governments have this, that you are not allowed to meet privately.
Right.
You have to talk publicly. If that was the case, it'd be a different story. But until you pass a law like that, having a nominal C-SPAN covered event's not going to.
Right. But also, look, if you're a city council and you have 7 members, you can pass a law like that says 2 of you can't be in the same room together, or 3 of you. But how do you stop 454 people from, or however many, members of Congress there are at a given, or if you count the U.S. Senate too? How do you keep them from all being at the Capitol Hill Club at the same time?
It does speak to some possible logistical problems. So, it was one of the few times I'd say that Obama did something on the campaign trail that was, you could see this is going to cause you problems going forward. But having said that, I think when the bill gets passed, there's going to be a general relief that something got passed, and there's not going to be a hang-up over this C-SPAN promise. Because at the end of the day, most people care about how a bill is going to affect them, not about the process along the way.
All right. Well, there have been rumblings that Massachusetts State Senator Scott Brown, a Republican, is running surprisingly strong in the January 19th Senate special election against Attorney General Martha Coakley. This is to replace to take the Ted Kennedy seat. New numbers out of Rasmussen show that it's close. I think it's down to 9 points. So what do you say, Bill? You live in Massachusetts. Is this a real race, or is this much ado about nothing?
I think it's not a real race. But I understand why a lot of conservatives got very excited about that Rasmussen poll, not just in the hopes of taking away a seat, but I think some conservative blogs have said this. Forgive me if I don't remember which ones, you might know. If they actually managed to win this seat, they could actually stop health care. They could actually filibuster it.
Right, because this one, no. Okay, so the election's the 19th. When would the senator be sworn in, do you know?
That's a good question. I don't know if Harry Reid could slow walk it in some way. I don't know. Or would they just have to rush passage and say, okay, Pelosi, just suck it up and pass this thing because we're on the clock.
How ironic would it be if the Ted Kennedy seat stopped health care?
I think it's a fantasy that's making conservative bloggers giddy. But I think this is a case where you don't want to put too much stock in a Rasmussen poll. He's a conservative pollster. Often his numbers skew to the right.
I would disagree. I would disagree with that. I think that it's a legitimate polling outfit, and I think that their polls have been consistently consistent. But regardless of that, I don't know if he does a lot of good. Like let's say that he is inflating the numbers for Brown.
And I think Nate Silver did make an argument that his Nate Silver had a post at 538 arguing that, if I'm remembering correctly, that he was overestimating the partisan makeup of the electorate and downplaying the role of independents. And Silver's point was those independents could actually go in a number of different directions. So I'm not saying to you that Rasmussen's bottom line numbers are necessarily wrong,
right.
But there are a lot of quote unquote unenrolled people in Massachusetts that tend to vote Democratic. So
and even if you look at straight registration, it's 3-1 Democrat over Republican. In Massachusetts, and
right. There's a healthy independent constituency that's not enrolled in any party.
Sure. And then turnout's going to be. How do you predict turnout for a January 19th election?
Well, I think that's one of the things that conservatives are going to hang their hat on. If it's a low turnout election, could they get enough people energized about Scott Brown? Can you push the Rasmussen poll into the conservative media machine So at least Massachusetts conservatives can feel like there's a shot here, and ensure they show up. And then you have Coakley's people thinking that they got a cakewalk, and they don't show up, and you snatch the seat.
Right.
That's the best scenario
and
they
Coakley
got. Actually, can't knock folks for trying.
And Coakley will have. I don't think. Look, I do not believe that Rasmussen is cooking the numbers or anything like that. Now, it doesn't mean the Republicans aren't jumping on them and using them. But look, the fact that it's a 9-point race, I mean,
well,
that's a
I bet
landslide.
there's a Boston Globe poll that will come out within a few days.
Mm-hmm.
And if that poll confirms it's a 9-point race, then you got another story. If they show a different picture, then you can't. You can then maybe say, "Oh, well, I still trust Rasmussen over the Globe or whatever," but it wouldn't necessarily be definitive that it's that close.
Well, look, with any polling, I always like to see multiple polls.
Yeah.
Because they're the outlier thing. So, John McCormick.
To your turnout question, though, I was talking to a local political operative last night at the 2 nights ago at the Northampton Drinking Liberally. And he was like, look, the Democratic machine in Massachusetts is very strong. You're going to have all these local mayors and state reps and sheriffs and folks like that, turning it on for Coakley. They'll get their people out. And the Republican Party has just nothing of that scale to lean on to ensure they get people out. And
she's going to have a lot more money, and just turning out Democrat. Even if you only turn out one Democrat for every 2 Republicans, you'd still win. And so many more Democrats, but you're right. I mean, if they can employ the Democrat machine up there that has consistently won elections, although. So there are 2 conservative bloggers I thought who took really interesting positions on this. The Next Right's Patrick Ruffini wrote, I don't know that there's a scenario that would show Scott Brown ahead right now, but there are plenty of scenarios I could see that would show this within the margin, and conditions right now seem optimal. A fired-up Republican Tea Party base that is stirring beneath the surface, and a complacent Democratic Party. That's sort of, I think, the happy, optimistic viewpoint. I think Eric Erickson at Red State takes the more realistic viewpoint when he says, I think we should take a serious look at Scott Brown. The odds are he won't win. Let's be realistic about it, but let's also remember that Joseph Gow could not win William Jefferson's district in Louisiana until he did. And unlike Gow, where Scott Brown elected to the United States Senate, he'd be the 41st vote against Obamacare. The odds are against Scott Brown, but only slightly this race is winnable. So that's, I think, a good feel for where conservatives are on this race.
And Scott Brown seems to be, I think, taking that to heart. He's Massachusetts Republicans that have one state wide, which is pretty much only for governor.
Right.
Do a moderate, fiscal conservative, but socially liberal path to the governorship. I'm not like those other Republicans that you see on Fox, but I will be a healthy check on the Democratic legislature. And the Republicans own the governor's mansion for a 16-year run based on that model. Scott Brown is not running that campaign. He is running a red meat, right-wing campaign trying to fire up what conservative base exists in Massachusetts to see if he can win on a low turnout scenario. Mm-hmm. So it's a test of that theory.
And if Scott Brown wins, or I would argue even comes close, in Massachusetts, Ted Kennedy's seat, that should tell us something about the political environment. I think the fact that we're even talking about Republicans even being anywhere close in a Massachusetts U.S. Senate race to take Ted Kennedy's seat, that alone says all that needs to be said about.
I'm not seriously talking about that. I'm entertaining it for our purposes here.
Well, let's look for the next poll.
But I would, even if it did happen, I think what it would tell you is you can sneak by in a low turnout election with a fired up base, which may be what wins the day in 2010 for a lot of the Republicans. But it's not the same thing as saying that the entire country is shifted rightward or Massachusetts is all of a sudden no longer a liberal state.
That's true, but intensity does tell you how elections in 2010 are going to turn out, regardless of whether or not the political center has shifted. Intensity drives turnout, and this could be a harbinger of things to come. If Republican intensity propels Brown to win or even to come close, one might presume that Republican intensity might also propel other Republicans to win in races in places like Nevada. So
agreed, sir.
All right.
Final topic. This is a media ethics issue,
Yes.
something that my group, Campaign for America's Future, has been involved with. Washington Post last month entered into a formal partnership with the new organization called the Fiscal Times, which is founded by and financially backed by Pete Peterson, who was a former Nixon cabinet official. He's been a leading austerity activist, calling for drastic changes in Social Security and Medicare, balanced budget at all costs, Keynesian economics be damned, and lately pushing this notion of a deficit commission that would put legislation to close the budget gap essentially immediately on the House and Senate floor with no opportunity for filibuster or amendment, and circumvent the entire committee process. Washington Post has partnered with the Fiscal Times to provide news content, not opinion content. And they ran a story on New Year's Eve, bylined by the Fiscal Times, that promoted this commission concept and gave no serious space to critics of the proposal, of which there are many, my group being one of them. And so Roger Hickey at ourfuture.org, economist Dean Baker at Huffington Post, did a series of blog posts about this over the last several days, and they ginned up enough interest in this that actually the Politico ran a story, Columbia Journalism Review ran a story, and the New York Times ran a story, all raising the larger media ethics question about farming out your news content to outside organizations backed by people with ideological agendas. Is this a harbinger of things to come for the financially distressed journalism industry?
And by the way, I mean, the ombudsman. Did I say that right? Ombudsman. Sometimes, words that you just forget. It's bizarre. The ombudsman of the Washington Post, just a couple, I guess around the first, did a story talking about all the ethical challenges that they faced in 2009, and admitting, guilt. And the most famous one was where they were having, what was it? If you paid, if you were a lobbyist and you paid money, you could come influence Obama administration officials. I mean, so this also just sort of plays into, and again, why did they do that? Because they needed money, obviously, right? So
they'll try to come up with new. The business model for most print publications was a lot of classified ads, which have been gutted by Craigslist. So they're all trying to figure out, and not to mention the issue of losing readership to free online content. And there's ad revenue there, but not enough to keep these organizations going, it seems. So what do? And so they're trying to find creative ways to get revenue, but can you do it in a way that doesn't violate basic journalistic ethics?
And it also reminds me of the tele press releases, or what were they called?
The video press releases.
Video press releases that, what was it, the Bush administration would have feeds where they would put together their own news packages, right? And then
local local TV outlets wanting cheap content. Hey, someone made a news package for me. I can just drop it in. No muss, no fuss.
Exactly, and obviously, I mean, there was an uproar about that. So this seems to also fit right into that. So wow, and again, I mean, it's something that either side could do. There's no, propaganda isn't isn't just a wholly owned subsidiary of one political philosophy. I mean, it's something to keep an eye on, I think, because on both sides of the aisle this could happen. The Washington Post does this thing that also bothers me, and they will sell to Russia Russia buys a section every once in a while in the Washington Post.
Well, in the print, they have a whole
in the print
4-page
section.
spread, all the awesome things happening in Russia.
And it's called Russian News. And the thing that really irked me was
advertorials, I believe they're called.
Right, but it's not so obvious if it's an advertorial.
I think a lot of nation lobbies do that. I don't think that's Russia's only trick. I've seen a lot of countries do that in pages of the Washington Post before.
But the problem is, when Russia invaded Georgia, they did it like a day or two later, and the stories were all like. The stories were all about all the atrocities the Georgians were committing against Russians. I mean, and for the Washington Post to run that and to not number one, they're taking money from Russia.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Columbian Journalism Review blog post on this by Trudy Lieberman, addresses that point because obviously every newspaper in the country is paid for by ads. And there are potential conflicts of interest with your advertisers. Are you going to run stories that are critical of your advertisers or not? Those issues have been long-standing, and most papers will say, hey, our advertising department is a firewall between them and our news department, so there's no issue there.
Right.
So Trudy Lieberman said, he who pays the piper calls the tune, and there are lots of payers funding content for the entire paper. But when a news service supplies specific content on narrow topics, or a philanthropic organization funds a single magazine writer to cover a topic near and dear to its mission, one pair can more easily call the tune. The advertising-supported model of journalism always had its own problems and conflicts. So does the philanthropic model. Now with news services inserting their stories into... So for consumers of news, it has always been caveat emptor. Now for news services inserting their stories into the MSM, these words take on added meaning. So she is arguing that it's even more pronounced. It's one thing to have a bunch of advertisers, Russia being one of them, but they're not your only advertiser. But when you have an ideological organization, say, I'm going to give you news content supporting my ideology and have you pass it off as direct news. There's not even a fine print saying it's an advertisement.
So there was no... Because part of it, I think, is transparency. If you do something but you're transparent about it, that's different than doing something and not being transparent about it. So how did this come out? I mean, this wasn't...
Well, the story that ran on the Washington Post on New Year's Eve, which I'm looking at online, they might have changed the wording around it now. I was pulling up the link right now, but from what I recall, I mean, this was an article by the Fiscal Times.
Okay, so it was the byline at least, but
right. Okay. So it says support grows for tackling nation's debt by Elaine Espovich and Eric Pianin, the Fiscal Times, like the way it would run the Associated Press or Reuters.
Right. So as if they were like a news outlet or whatever.
I mean, that's what they're styling themselves as. This article was produced by the Fiscal Times, an independent digital news publication reporting on fiscal, budgetary, healthcare, international economics issues. So that's how they're characterizing it. And so after this controversy brewed, they tacked on a correction to the article and said, this article by the Fiscal Times about growing congressional support for a bipartisan commission to address the nation's debt contained a statement supporting the concept by Robert L. Bixby, the executive director of the Concord Coalition. The article should have noted the Concord Coalition receives funding from the Peter G. Pearson Foundation. Pearson Bernardes Foundation also funds the Fiscal Times, the independent news service that prepared that article. So they've made a concession that they didn't do as full of disclosure as they should have. But they're still in this partnership with the Fiscal Times over the long haul, although my group is trying to get them to end that.
Let me ask you this question, though, because media outlets do partnerships, right? So what if the Washington Post decided to have a partnership with the Huffington Post and take some content from them and put up it's from the Huffington Post? I mean, we know that the Huffington Post is liberal-leaning.
Right. I mean, I think the difference there is, I'm not saying the Washington Post should do that. I mean, I think the Huffington Post is a left-leaning outlet, and it would call into question the Washington Post's overall ideological outlook if they did that. But it's not quite the same ethical violation as an organization with a specific ideological objective. Not saying it's broad-based, but they want to get this deficit commission passed. They create a news article saying support grows for deficit commission, and doesn't take into account any criticism of that commission, and pawns it up as a news story. That's a much more clean-cut ethical violation in my view. Whereas the Huffington Post is becoming more akin to like a Fox News, which at least does some news reporting that, Huffington Post is left-leaning, but they're not soft on the Obama administration by a long shot. They're not partisan. And you can make that argument about Fox News, too, though some people would argue that Fox News is partisan. But they're both in the press pool. They both cover the White House. They both have press credentials and all that sort of thing. They're not founded by people who have very, issue-specific issue objectives.
Okay. And let me just put out the disclaimer that I know very little about this story, but I find I don't want to. I'm not going to defend or attack the Fiscal Times, good or bad, but I find it to be a fascinating topic because the whole media landscape is changing, and it's more difficult now than ever let me put it this way. Media outlets are facing new challenges that they never had to face before, and we are sure to see more of these topics coming up. Howard Kurtz should write about this. It seems like it would be up his alley.
He should. He's always knocked for not shining that media spotlight on the people he works for.
Shine the light of
news
truth
stories
on
about
America.
Washington Post ethics or CNN ethics. So this would actually be an opportunity for him to show he could do a story about an ethical issue involving his own newspaper.
Well, let's see if he gets on it. Well, thank you, Bill. Good to have you back.
Good to be back, sir. I look forward to seeing you in D.C. next week, and I guess I'll be in D.C. We'll have to do our blogging heads from there.
That'd be awesome. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Check us out on Twitter at The Weekend Blog, on Facebook at facebook.com/TheWeekendBlog. And we will see you next week. Have a good one, Bill.
You too.
All right.